Chapter 16. The War. I flung the plum door wide open and slammed it closed with pride. A loud thump that encapsulated my wonderful meeting with the doctor perfectly, as it was a blunt and loud, obnoxiously drawn-out sound. A sound that failed to wake the chainsaw revving on the floor. I delicately shook him awake until his eyes flickered open and beamed at me. I couldn't help but smile. When it came to people in my life, they're best described as library books. I rent them out, flip through their pages, and if I hold on to them for too long, then there's bound to be consequences. For the doctor, his trial period didn't last long. And for Gregory, I was more than willing to give the man another glance. It was a rare feeling, but he was worth it.
"Walter, that nap was incredible! I feel extraordinarily better," he exclaimed, while he started rising off the ground.
"I'm fairly sure you're highly drugged right now, my friend, but let's just ignore that and try to stay on task," I replied. It was immensely encouraging seeing the man stand and walk under his own power. My plans for that night were highly ambitious, and if I had to carry around a 200-plus pound weight the entire time, then I might as well have given up right there. In truth, I probably would have just cut to the chase and jumped off the top of the balcony. Alas, that wasn't necessary, as Gregory was stretching and moving about in no time. He'd always been an absurdly quick healer, but this situation was unworldly. Leave it to the doctor to supply some shady backstreet pills, but to be honest, I was extremely grateful.
"What was the meeting about?"
asked Gregory, as he leaned against the deck's banister, enjoying the magnificent view before him. In the distance, the portrait in the air brought chills down my spine. It very well could have just been the alcohol kicking in, but the vision before me was absolutely captivating. The teetering of twilight was illuminating the air, rapidly engulfing the sun. Darwin may have been poisoned by the march of death, but at least he was doing so to an audience of dazzling stars. It was about an old, disturbed man who brought down an entire plane to get me here. A man who has the audacity to kill dozens of people and then turn around and call me insane. Pure illusion in the finest of forms, I replied, careful to keep my voice low, as I knew the doctor was likely listening to every word on the other side of the door. Gregory then took a deep, hoarse breath and shook his head.
"To be objectively fair, it was not part of the plan. I was supposed to land the plane in the ocean, and then call for help. A patrol was waiting by the phone for that call to be made. Once we landed, all the other passengers would have been whisked away with the boats, with you and I on a raft, on our way here. It clearly sounds dangerous, but I was in the Air Force. I was certain I could land the plane. I've done it plenty of times during training. It's simple, really. Of course, I wasn't prepared for a lightning storm, especially one that could take down a commercial airline carrier," he said, remnants of guilt festering from his words. "You guys went that far just to get me? Crashing an entire plane. As if I'm that important." He looked back at the office door and paused. His head then drooped to the floor. "The doctor was enthralled by you, Walter. He thought you were paramount for the future of his research. Once that opportunity was available, he demanded from his colleagues that they make this dreadful endeavor happen. Believe it or not, when somebody is capable of creating what he's made, that earns someone some pull. He cashed it in on the flight, thought it would be worth the hassle to bring you on board."
I laughed. Believe it or not, he finally asked me the question. He wanted to know if I'd be his glorious apprentice, I stated.
"And what'd you say?"
I said, hell no. Well, not exactly. That's pretty much how it went. Regardless, he's giving me the night to think about it.
"Perhaps it might help. Crazier things have happened. Hell, I just fell asleep near a cripple. And now look at me," he boasted, his words slightly slurred from his drug.
It was clear Gregory wasn't very familiar with the power of addictive pharmaceuticals. I patted the 50-year-old pill pusher on the back and shook my head. It wouldn't be possible. By the time tomorrow arrives, I'm either going to be long gone or dead trying. I'm completely serious, too. We're leaving, Greg. And we're leaving tonight, I said. He looked back at me unperturbed, simply nodding his head along.
Good. What's the plan?
He asked. I'm glad you asked, I replied, twirling my fingers like a cartoonish villain. I felt like Sherlock Holmes planning an elaborate, devious plot. The only difference was that I didn't have a charming British accent to cover up my arrogance, and my Watson was a burly, deranged maniac. On top of that, in this scenario, Sherlock was drunk and John was high. It was easily the best way to lift our spirits and courage as we gallivanted onward, happy as can be. During our gleeful stroll through the crashing of day, I suddenly felt a rush of anxiousness. My companion was hounding me with every question his mind could conjure, needing to know every single detail of my plan and discussing every worst-case scenario. Greg, I'd love to sit here and draw you a perfectly sketched diagram and chart about how we're going to get out of here, but I can't. Mainly because Gamma hasn't told me yet, but also because we're going to be extraordinarily late, I blurted, my words admittedly a tad slurred from the doctor's sauce.
Late for what?
He yelled, as he followed behind. For the funeral, you idiot! I just told you, I yelled, as I jumped down every step like a madman. The brick house has cordially invited us to a little get-together. Some primitive tribal ceremony in which they're going to execute Darwin. Zeta thinks he's a menace and is solving that problem by slitting his throat and throwing him into a river. Some really highbrow stuff going on around here, I replied.
Darwin is alive?
Shouted Gregory, as he nearly stumbled 50 flights in astonishment. Yep. It's probably best you don't dwell on that thought, though. In about an hour, that won't be the case. Now, it may appear as if I was taking the awfully grievous situation with the severity of a toddler, but the truth was I was downright terrified. Joking was the only way for me to not crumble into tears. I have two ends of a spectrum when drunk, depressed or laughing my face off, and the latter was the only option at that point. Nevertheless, each trial up and down the marathon of never-ending steps failed to get any easier. Every trek swirled me back in time to the horror-fueled mountain climb, my lungs ceasing to adapt to the rapid changes in the heights and sprints. When the heavenly last step arrived, we couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, and gasp a sigh of perplexity at the horde of citizens gathered around the city square, sobering the two of us up with their distraught and broken faces. Almost every single creation had seemingly arrived, sick, young, and soldiers alike huddled tightly together in a neat and fashioned cluster. In the epicenter was Gamma, melancholy and supportive of the colony of women and children standing nearby. Their entire being seemed distraught, while Zeta's sons looked on proudly, each of the spotted beasts lined side by side, forming a spindly wall around the crowd. Noticeably absent, Darwin, which comforted me, and Zeta, which frightened me. As we approached the congregation, Gregory decided to shout them hello.
Good evening, my fellow creatures. We have come to join you,
in his friendly, bellowing tone. My face fell pink at the sight of the entire assembly whipping their faces towards us. Gregory was grinning from ear to ear as they watched us with their soulful eyes. An emotion that morphed into elation as they all fell to their knees. Guards kicked and hollered at them to rise, but to their chagrin, the citizens wouldn't listen, unfazed by the taunts and threats the monsters threw their way. Gregory pulled me with him into the crowd, who rose and touched us with affection as we dug our way into the center, joining Gamma, who embraced me as tears fell from her eyes.
It hurts, letting my son die for the greater good.
It's what he would want, and yet here I stand, thinking I'm making a terrible mistake," she whispered. "We're going to change the world, you and I. Through his death, we will save all of these people. This is going to work, but we can't back out now." "You have to trust me," I affirmed. We then waited together for quite some time until the sun fully set. A black pavement riddled with blazing white lights that fell dull in comparison to the gigantic orb in the sky. A moon like no other that lit the stage for Darwin's finale. The swarm of creatures then started walking in unison, hands clutched tightly together as they hummed a sweet hymn. Onward we marched, as the drum in Gamma's heart could be heard beating exceptionally loud. Our journey was short, as we scaled down a mossy field and arrived at the summit of a river. Vibrant ivory flowers sprouted handsomely from the soil, their stems plush with prickly onyx thorns. It was a stroke of beauty atop a harrowingly steep cliff, one that housed 20 or so torches that were entrenched into the earth, cascading along the edges of the drop. Below us, the churning of rapid waves fused itself into the creature's song as streaks of the ocean came crashing down, plummeting against the bouldery base of the cliff, causing water to spurt in the air like fireworks, their embers landing softly atop the verdant grass beneath our feet. A chilling mist that cleaned the legion of bubbling scars etched on the tops of Gregory's feet. Our wait persisted until a set of boisterous stomps brought the choir of singing to a blistering halt. Zeta came galloping in, jubilant and satisfied as ever, while his sons watched on gleefully.
"People of the city, our night of justice has arrived," he roared, a proclamation that injected a vial of vitality into the soldiers' spines, and a sentence that was deflected by an army of empty, solemn canvases, faces that were defenseless against the horror that descended from above. Darwin ambled stiffly down the hill, accompanied by a cavalry of soldiers who circled around him, his face painted burgundy and his hands bound tightly with twine. As the restrained prisoner and his overseers joined us on the cliff, an eerie silence encapsulated the crowd. "A traitor has arrived, stained red from the blood of swine, a reminder of the beast that he has become. A savage who attempted to kill our father and violated his sentence of exile. Tonight is the last day of his reign. An end to the treachery that has infected our great city, and a chance to rid ourselves of an enemy. One whose filth will no longer blemish our walls," said Zeta, an outcry that was aimed directly at Darwin's face, effectively coating the pig fluid with drooly discharge that bursted from the giant's mouth. "That's enough," yelled Dr. Oscar as he approached atop the hill. In a panic, the audience and patrol fell to the floor, bowing to the ancient figure as they waited for instruction. My arms crossed as the man smiled brightly upon the obedient crowd. All but 3 of the flock before him knelt in praise. Unable to give in to his ego, Gamma, Gregory, and I stood out of spite. "Hello, my daughter. I did not know you were going to accompany us here tonight. A very delightful surprise," bellowed the old man. "Save your pleasantries, Doctor. They're not needed here. No need to waste time. Go ahead. Make your speech," she commanded, an act that made Darwin snicker. As a reward, Zeta stomped at the back of his knees until he was flat on the floor. Dr. Oscar ignored her words and motioned for everybody to rise with a wave of his hand. The assembly beneath listened as the doctor started his descent down the field. "Children, grandchildren, and guests, Welcome to one of the darkest days in the history of our city. Today, we lose a member of our family, someone many have grown to know and love, myself included. Through Delta, many of us have learned what it means to be a friend, a brother, or even a leader. Crucial instruction that have helped grow our community and shape our colony, declared the doctor, while he inched closer and closer. Zeta was stewing in his own rage, as his master continued to compliment his enemy. Delta is a teacher in that regard, one who has taught us to lead by example, and now, with his last moments approaching, he has constructed one final lesson. A lesson that will forever be cemented in our city's history. From the eyes of the matriarch to the minds of the youth, forever we will remember this day. The doctor finally approached the crowd and put his hand atop the head of one of Zeta's newborn children. The future of your species will be hinged upon the lesson Delta is about to complete. Through his death, our children will learn the cost of disobedience, the damage that comes from those who betray, those who disregard our laws. If order is to be preserved, it will find longevity in the barrels of judgment. How we treat those who defile that order, regardless of their illustrious past. Both Gregory and I were slowly making our way towards the back of the crowd as the doctor spoke. At a snail's pace, we were approaching the brush that lied plush along the edge of the cliff. Our only escape route, a teetering death trap with an extremely steep drop. The island, as usual, not doing us any favors. Our footsteps were meticulous and soft, making sure our minor disruption was drowned by the echoes of the doctor's emphatic lecture. Not a difficult thing to accomplish, as he incessantly rambled on. For those of you who do not know, Delta was one of my first creations. Once a child, like many of you in the audience, but gifted beyond his years, I did my duty in raising him and providing a stable home for himself and his mother. Many of you are familiar with that home, as it stretches for acres upon acres right behind us. I gave them a city for one sole purpose: generosity, he stated. Zeta and his soldiers were all nodding along, agreeing with every word their god spewed from his crooked lips. A creation is like a flower. Without the right amount of sunlight, it cannot grow. I was extraordinarily careful when raising the mother and her cub, providing an ample amount of light, so much so that they broke from their flower pot and became trees. Uncontrollable miracles that sprouted into exceptionally bright and physically gifted beings. These trees grew roots so deep and prominent. Many of you are still familiar with their impact to this day. Unlimited talents that can propel someone from a basic blight in existence into a god who changes the modern world. For an example, look no further. Alas, a disappointment stands before me. One who rejected his gifts in the pursuit of individuality. One who rejects Zeta as his leader and myself as his god. Tonight, we are here to inform the youth and the misguided of the consequences that come with those actions. We are here to right the wrong of our dastardly Delta, what he has committed, with one final solution," he finished, calling upon Zeta, who plucked from the floor a large, jagged blade. I could no longer watch the live execution, as both Gregory and I plummeted to the floor. The only thing we could hear were the moans of the crowd while we crawled under the cloak of brush, hugging the edge of the cliff which splashed spurts of the sea into our backs. The two of us wiggled ferociously through the soil, kicking through the thick grass while Zeta grunted away holy words, likely a prayer before he had to make his pivotal slice. Just as we were nearly in the clear and away from the crowd, I did something only a fool would do. As I was making my valiant escape, I smacked one of the torches with my feet and knocked it clean off the ledge. Thunderous whacks could be heard as it rattled along the rocky wall beneath. Zeta's words fell quiet as the crowd muttered to themselves, my head buried into the mire, compressing screams of rage as yet another idiotic mistake erupted before me. Gregory shushed me silent as a rustling could be heard behind us. Footsteps grew closer and closer as meaty feet could be heard pounding against the floor. The both of us froze in our tracks, appearing helpless, until Gamma's voice could be heard booming through the crowd. "Lies!" she screamed. "You fill these people up with lies, Doctor. Venomous tricks to deceive and hide your wickedness. You treat my children like experiments, mindless data ready to be collected. You expect us to simply accept your heartless conniving? A brilliant creator like you should have expected this day to come, when your machines became aware of their nature. You told Delta everything you knew, how he was made and the purpose of his life, to become a mindless slave, and yet, for some reason, you were surprised when he resisted, aiming for perfection and ignoring the cost. Perhaps you're not as smart as you think, simply a coward who lets his shield do the dirty work, not even courageous enough to finish what he started. My brawny brute of a son can't change that perception, and these cruel ceremonies won't help either. Your mind is lost, Father, and we will no longer pay the price for your insanity. Zeta was right. Tonight is a night for justice. For yours, she roared, as the crowd grew anxious. What is she doing? I asked Gregory, as he looked back tensely. She's buying us time, he whispered, as he tugged me to crawl forward. Eventually we made our way up the hill into the stairs, sprinting like crackheads on a treadmill, blazing up the stairs like our lives depended on it. Likely because they actually did. As I got to the top step, I peered over the balcony and spotted the doctor. He was easing the crowd with his demented rhetoric, successfully calming many. Gamma was being held down by her son, as Zeta wrapped her tightly with his massive arms. "Quick! We don't have much longer!" yelled Gregory, as he pulled me through the office door. Not one cabinet was left unsearched, as we shoveled through pounds of trash, desperately searching for a transmitter. Each wasted moment felt like an eternity, as the doctor could have walked through the door at any minute. Violent factors bursting in my head, clogging my working memory, erasing any detective work or logistics I could have possibly fathomed. Luckily, Gregory was not affected by that same twisted plague, and offered a possible location. "It's in his desk, Walt. There's no other place I could think of," he exclaimed, fretfully trying to rip the drawers from the metal cupboard. Each was ensnared by a small copper lock, and not one key was in sight. Our search continued for a possible needle within a mountain of compost that sullied the hardwood floors below us. An impossible task that destroyed minutes of precious time.
While our forge was starting to run its course, my mind shifted to the vast array of screens bedecked on the far side of the wall. Amidst the copious amounts of foliage and dead air, one monitor drew my attention. Filtering through the black and white display was the image of 3 cells. Each were empty, as Kappa, Tau, and Kai were bludgeoning the 2 spotted guards to death on the floor, rapidly battering away like an ape atop hapless prey. "Greg, look at this," I commented as a smile whipped across my face. He glanced up towards the screen and paused as I broke his block of concentration. "It looks like we won't be the only ones making an escape tonight," he said, while diverting his focus back to the filth-riddled floor. "They're not escaping," I replied, shaking my head as I continued. "They have nowhere to go. That cheeky bastard. Maybe Darwin had his own plan after all," I affirmed, as I pounded away until the 2 frozen carcasses remained on the ground. The 2 creatures had murdered the sons of the man who held their fate in his hands. It seemed Darwin's plan contained bloodshed. It contained war.
"Ah, yes, this can work,"
bellowed Gregory as he plucked a paper clip from the floor. He then rammed it inside the keyhole socket and twisted and pulled until the lock slammed to the floor. The both of us flung the cabinet open and dug through the bevy of overflowing junk stuck to the barrels of the drawer. Old newspapers, likely from the 80s, dozens upon dozens of cheap glass lighters, molded bread, countless files, and alas, a transmitter. Soaked to the bone in dust, which caked the ancient machine in a smoky bile. I hesitated to touch the smut-infested object, while it resided amongst a nest of cobwebs and entombed bugs.
"Let's give this a try,"
muttered Gregory, as he flung his hands deep into the drawer and pulled the machine from the depths. Instantly, he placed the microphone to his lips and screamed.
"Hello! Mayday! Mayday! Is anyone there?"
he croaked, while the machine lay dead on the top of the desk, unresponsive and useless. Gregory then turned to me and shrugged, his mouth now dosed with a platinum grime-composed lipstick. I wiped the smut from his face and chuckled. "It probably works better when it's plugged in," I suggested, tracing the wires against the wall until an outlet appeared from the sea of slime. I punched the cord into the socket, receiving a charge of electricity that trickled up my wrist. My pain was clouded in the wonderment of the radio coming alive before my eyes. Atop the desk it flickered lights and released a sound of static, which came and went as Gregory turned the dial. Channel by channel we surfed, ceasing to find any welcome voices ready to answer our call. Hope was almost lost until we were greeted by the sound of silence, a channel devoid of static or feedback from the rickety machine. Gregory picked up the mic, his eyes wide and curious, like deer hot glued to a headlight.
Is anyone there?"
he softly asked. Scuttling could be heard on the other end, and then another block of silence.
"Hey, Doc, how you doing up there, buddy? We haven't heard from you in a while," said a man.
His voice had an odd accent, but his words were clear. Gregory did not answer. Instead, he froze, unable to speak.
"Dr. Oscar?"
"Hello," the voice repeated. Again he said nothing, choking at the least opportune of moments. Several seconds of emptiness that essentially closed our minute window of an opportunity. A window I stretched miles wide with the clutch of the microphone.
"We need help. There's an enormous fire here. It's destroying the entire city. Please send support. Planes, boats, everything. We're all dying here. All of my creations. Oh, please come," I roared.
It was a rare spark of genius, as countless voices started chattering on the other side of the channel. A woman then took to the microphone to answer our cries.
Doctor, please stay safe. Do your best to save all of your medical records and samples. We're sending a chopper and boat to the island shortly, and will take some time, but we'll get there, Doc. Hold tight, she pleaded.
Her voice was urgent and frail, riddled with a thick accent. As I hung up the transmission, Gregory beamed at me.
"They're sending help,"
he repeated, almost teary-eyed as he stood there jittering. I heard them, buddy. I heard them. A fire brigade ready to come and save us. Are you ready to get out of here? I asked. The both of us hurtled over the plethora of rubbish and escaped onto the deck, full to the brim with a triumphant glow as Gamma's plan worked to perfection. The only remaining hurdle? Finding Gamma. While bringing her home was a ridiculous notion, her utility as a guide was potentially very useful. While that's all fine and dandy, it brought us to another issue. Our guide was coiled in the arms of a Hulk. Gregory and I looked over the balcony's wall and discovered that sad fact to remain true. Gamma was still being held hostage, and the doctor was still talking. Rather strange, as if we were transported 20 minutes into the past. Darwin was still alive, kneeling soberly on the floor as he listened to the verbal poison littering the air. Many in the crowd were subdued by Zeta's soldiers, restrained and anxious as the doctor paced before Darwin with a blade in hand. Water bursting behind him, cracking in the moonlight. A rush of guilt fumed inside of me as I realized how I failed my friend, breaking a final promise to someone who had saved me on several occasions. A selfless angel forced to sit while a devil played with his food, twirling the blade in his hands as the crowd watched in horror. You know, Greg, that man right there jumped off a goddamn mountain for us, and we stand here twiddling our thumbs, I exclaimed. Brutal honesty that erased my brevity of euphoria. I was on the verge of escape, after all. One would think I'd be ecstatic, but for some reason, watching complete injustice unfold before me made my toes curl. "What are you suggesting?" he inquired. "I'm suggesting we bar our little savior some time before his friends show up. A sliver of hope is the least we could offer." Gregory cupped his face in his hands, exhaling a deep breath of disappointment. "Risking our lives for a monster." I shook my head. Risking our lives for a friend. Besides, at this point, Greg, I'm starting to feel like we might be bulletproof. And why not go out with a bang? I suggested. He rolled his eyes in annoyance, perfectly aware of the implications of this idea. "Oh, you want a distraction, huh? How about jumping off this tower? I'm sure that might get their attention," he muttered. As I looked back at the engraved tree, an idea emerged in my matter. "That might not be necessary," I answered. I then rushed back into the office and rifled through the doctor's drawers, plucked all 30 of his $1 lighters from the cabinet, and placed them inside the belly of my shirt, wrapping them closely as I teetered towards the stove, cranked it to full blast, and walked back outside with a devilish smirk tattooed on my face. You know, Greg, there's no reason my little cry for help has to be a lie. Perhaps we can provide a signal for our boys in the chopper to come find us, I suggested, as I dropped the lighters onto the redwood floor. "You have a death wish," he joked, while picking up one of the glass lighters and analyzing its nacre nature. "Sure do," I yelled as I heaved almost each and every one of the lighters against the bark, effectively dosing the door, office, and house with a highly flammable juice. I then picked up the lone remaining lighter and turned back to Gregory with a childish grin. "Don't do this," he whispered, as his hand covered his mouth. In complete astonishment, as I flicked the lighter open, lit it, and set the tree ablaze. Millions of dollars in records, research, and brutality engulfed before our eyes in a red fury. One last gift the island had to offer. a blissful bonfire that wholeheartedly satisfied years of repression and stifling my id had to endure. One last big fuck you to the doctor who thought he could get away with capturing me and imprisoning me on this private hellhole getaway. I ran towards the railing and was delighted to find the entire assembly halted to complete stop. The doctor flushed with rage, and Darwin standing with a bright, vibrant grin on his face. "How about that, Doc? Am I imagining this too? Are these flames simply delusions in my fucked up brain? Or are your years of research actually turning to ash right behind me?" I screamed, my lungs nearly bursting while I called from above. I doubt he could have heard me, but I couldn't have cared less. I wasn't going to let the asshole win, and with one little stroke of a ladder's wheel, I succeeded. Zeta's soldiers were frantic, releasing the unruly citizens from their grasps and sprinting to their father's side. The giant was panicked as Gamma slipped from his grasp and rushed back to her people in the crowd. A clear divide was starting to form as Zeta did not attempt to retrieve her. Instead, he flashed his head towards the doctor and waited for the order. Dr. Oscar's arm flung in the air, pointing to the inferno in the sky, pointing to us. In an instant, Zeta and nearly 20 of his soldiers started sprinting up the hill. They were headed straight for the tower, and Gregory was fully cognizant about what they were after. He started rushing down the steps, jumping down flights as fast as he could. Personally, I did not move an inch. My id wasn't done with the doctor's anguish. He appeared defeated, dropping the blade to the floor as Darwin looked up at him, his god becoming mortal before his eyes, feeble and vulnerable while his legacy withered away. I was transfixed, unable to blink or move my legs, paralyzed by the glorious sight of a smug, egotistical bastard losing everything he had. Well, almost everything. Without warning, Darwin ripped the shackles from his wrist and rushed towards the doctor. He then leaped into the air and stomped the fossil in the chest, an act that sent the would-be god off the edge of the cliff. The mob of creatures hastily rushed towards Darwin and surrounded him, forming a protective shield against the onslaught of soldiers who hollered and whimpered at the death of their king, his greatest creation, taking away the last treacherous possession he possessed, his life. Glorious indeed. My gleeful bliss was thwarted by reality as Gregory sprang up the top step, nearly out of breath and furious as he pulled me with him. The both of us darted down the steps like rabbits, emphatically fast, as adrenaline coupled with euphoria to create an injection of acceleration I had never before possessed. I was deranged, on the brink of starvation, bloodied, and on cloud 9, as a horde of monsters were about to put us on a direct collision course. But I still couldn't help but cackle like an idiot as mania rang through me. Flashes of the doctor being heaved buzzed in my brain, a constant reminder I ceased to ignore. We magically found a way to reach the final step, while a copious thundering shook the floor beneath us. They were close, and if we kept sprinting forward, we were dead. In an effort to avoid that fate, Gregory tackled me to the floor and planted the both of us under a vast amount of dead lumber. I was instantly drowning in a sea of firewood, cloaked by sticks and a myriad of dead leaves that were entrenched on the ground. A completely god-awful cover, but as we lied motionless on the ground, it was enough. The beast sprinted right past us, frantic up the steps, in a desperate search for a dead man's enemies. It wouldn't be long before they realized the futility in that goal, and came rushing back to us. Both Gregory and I understood this. Our marathon continued as we zoomed through the city square, galloping like madmen in an effort to distance ourselves from the Colossus, the rare monster who deserved that title. one who was now unchained and free to unleash the gallons of vexation that hid beneath his eyes. From above, smoke rained from the sky, a black smog that paired with debris and cinders and fell all around us. It was a sight to behold, and one the pilots couldn't possibly ignore. We were going to be saved. I just knew it. Our rush through the city was seamless. We were making good time and racing swiftly away from the screams and yells from afar. And then, all of a sudden, we crashed, colliding forcefully with a group of creatures who barreled over us. The wind had been knocked out of me, as I writhed in pain on the floor. Terror erupted, as I considered the danger these soldiers likely possessed. A feeling that subsided as one of them calmly patted my back. I rolled over to the sight of Tao, Kappa, and Kai standing contently before us, smeared from head to toe in blood.
"Hello, stranger,"
said Kappa, as he lifted me to my feet. Gregory was exhausted on the floor, coughing and sucking air at a feverish pace.
"What have you done?"
asked Tao, as he looked on gleefully. I made a distraction for Delta. He needed my help. They were going to kill him after all. I couldn't think of anything else, I pleaded through bated breath.
"It's perfect,"
yelled Kappa, as he helped lift Gregory off the floor.
"And how's our brother doing?"
asked Kai. I think he's with Gamma. Look, we haven't much time. The doctor is dead, I stated, truthfully attempting to say the sentence with weight, and yet unable to, as a chuffed laugh fell through my lips.
"Dead?"
the two twins simultaneously asked. Dead as a doormat. Courtesy of your brother, I happily answered. All before me were shocked, while Gregory appeared more relieved than anything. But look, we can't waste another moment. Zeta is looking for us, and we need to get out of here, I exclaimed. The three of them looked shocked and shook their heads.
"We're not going anywhere,"
said Tao. Kappa nodded and agreed.
"He's right. We need to help brother. Keep him safe. Zeta will come for him. Try to kill him."
We were stuck on the battlefield of a war we didn't want to be in. Safety was a luxury that would have been impossible to obtain, and so we followed the three musketeers in their journey towards Darwin. Gregory may have resisted, but I knew what was best. Bodyguards were assets we couldn't refuse, and Gamma was our only way home. The five of us carefully slithered through the outskirts of the city until we could spot the group of civilians huddled together atop the hill. The soldiers were swarming them, slowly circling and inching nearer, severely outnumbered, and yet the crowd was unable to fight back, stagnated and still as their wall bubbled around Darwin and Gamma. We were nearby, safe and secure behind the protection of a longhouse, which was implanted amongst a cluster of brushwood. What do we do? I asked. Kappa shook his head.
"This wasn't supposed to be the plan. Why haven't they left?"
he asked. We must help them, said Kai, who appeared to be highly distressed, fidgeting from side to side while he stood there helpless.
"Patience," reminded Kappa. "They'll come."
It annoyed me how I was being left in the dark with Delta's plan, but to be fair, I didn't really give him a choice. So what comes next? I once again asked.
"We're supposed to meet at the longhouse." Yes. From there, we double back towards the prison and through the forest. But he's standing there. What is he doing? Questioned Tao.
Before us, the horde was getting violent, several pushing and shoving the cavalry away while they lunged to the center. Hostility rose as tykes were being bludgeoned and kicked from the blowback. One of the young spotted children even stood before the soldiers and heaved a fruitless punch. The guard laughed and whipped an ear-splitting smack across the kid's face, which sent him screaming to the floor.
"We can't just sit here,"
yelled Kai, who leaped from the grove and into the fray. He then viciously speared the soldier into the dirt and clobbered against his face, biting and chomping flesh, while the guard looked on petrified. Kai's courage was like the opening bell of a boxing match, catalyzing a revolution and eviscerating a cold war with a single blow. One after another, the crowd engulfed the frozen soldiers, using their mass to thrash and smother the beasts under the power of their stomps, suffocating the guards with their numbers and pummeling them deeper into the earth. The once meek and quiet crowd had become unleashed, releasing their inner beasts and scorching their own family tree. Kai was leading the pack as he ordered the group through the battle, flinging the soldiers' blades into the sea and swirling around the small army until there was nowhere for them to run. The circle of citizens grew smaller and smaller as they started picking off helpless guards one by one. Not even their strength could save against the people's power. Time went on, and surrender appeared imminent amidst the sloppy display of warfare. The fighting wasn't decorated with glitz and glam. It was truly awful. Mothers killing their sons, weeping while they crushed their skulls and mangled their eyes. For Zeta had stolen their children from them once before, and now they were doing the same to him. No joy was found with their frenzy. It was heart-wrenching. Through the one-sided affair appeared a voice.
"Doctor! Doctor!"
barked a deafening voice which halted the brawling that flooded the entire hill. Carnage and havoc cluttered the ground with the still bodies and moaning victims. A pure and utter massacre. As if the slaughter needed any more fuel, in walked Zeta, ready to add more numbers to the toll. Etched from head to toe in ash, he sauntered over to the crowd.
"Where is the doctor?"
he howled. The crowd scuttled backwards, a hasty retreat into their formidable shield, the exception being Kai, who rose proudly from the ground.
"Oscar is dead, brother,"
he cheered. The giant sneered.
"Do I look like a fool? Tell me where he is," he shouted.
"He's telling the truth," said Gamma, who emerged from the throng, her hands held high. She was serene and calm, while the crowd pleaded for her to return. She did not listen, strolling straight towards the behemoth with open arms.
"He's gone, son. You are no longer a prisoner to his ways. You're free, my boy. Free to live a life devoid of chains. Our days of violence are over," she affirmed.
Not an ounce of anger stifled from his mug. He was oddly tranquil, slowly pacing back and forth while he listened to his mother's words.
"Who killed him?"
he softly asked.
"That's not important, son. What's important is—"
It was an answer interrupted by Zeta, who bludgeoned her in the face.
"Who killed him?"
he rumbled. Gamma remained still, nonchalantly spitting blood from her mouth.
"I did,"
she admitted. Right before the Titan could release his fury, Darwin rushed forward.
"Don't, mother," he pleaded. "Zeta, I sent your master over that cliff. I let him drown in the rapids and die in the sea. It was I, no one else. I've come to pay your price, to end this war once and for all."
It was not met with battle cries or blows. Instead, Zeta paused and considered the possibility. He then ambled over to the edge of the cliff and looked downward.
"You lie, brother. Our master did not die by the sea. He was ravaged by the rocks below," he stated.
"A fitting end to a false god," snickered Darwin, who stood there, prepared to fight.
"Perhaps,"
muttered Zeta, as his eyes rolled to the back of his skull. scarlet daggers that flickered wide and gazed upon the jagged blade lying solemnly on the plush grass. Zeta released a demonic sneer as he lunged for it, catalyzing Kai to spring forward. The two beasts clashed together like two battering rams, pounding at each other's flesh with murderous intent. Zeta then grabbed Kai by the throat and lifted him high in the air. "Let this be another lesson for the traitors in the audience. Betrayal always meets justice," he declared, before launching Kai square into the soil. A crack could be heard as he penetrated the floor. He seemed highly disheveled, with bones and likely ribs shattered as he trembled before us, hopelessly crawling towards the crowd on all fours, while Zeta lifted the blade from the ground. "Mother, please, Mother," whimpered Kai as he squirmed toward her feet. An anguished attempt that halted the moment a knife went flying through the air and into his spine. Kai's face fell to the floor, while Zeta stood triumphantly behind him. Tao burst into rage, held by Kappa as he thrusted and wailed in agony. After a vicious pull, the blade was released from the creature's flesh. It now hung high in the air, dripping flesh drops of blood as Zeta aimed it towards the crowd. "This blood shall be yours, Delta. You cower away in your herd of traitors and watch your brother die before your eyes. Only a fool would follow you, you faithless fiend," he screamed. "He was your brother too," said Darwin, as he fell to his knees, sobbing uncontrollably while his face grew purple. In response to the treachery, Darwin did not move an inch. He couldn't have, or else more bloodshed could have formed. An idea that was confirmed as Zeta's army of soldiers appeared from the brush, joining their father atop the hill. Insurmountable reinforcements Darwin must have known he couldn't defeat. Zeta then lifted Darwin's chin with the edge of the blade. "I don't suppose you'll tell me where the human is?" he asked. "It could save your life." Gregory held me back. "Don't you dare," he whispered into my ear. I ignored him, signaling to Kappa and Tau, who were ready for combat, deranged and maniacal, as the monster took their brother's life before their eyes. Wait! Zeta, we need to speak," I yelled, as the beast looked up at me and grinned. The four of us moved forward into the crowd while Zeta held the blade to his brother's throat. "Ah, you've brought friends," he stated as he waved to my two guards. "My people, gaze upon your savior, Walter Mai, the little man he is, erasing years of work, years of suffering our people bled through. All for the sake of your species, you ungrateful mutt," seethed Zeta. "That's enough of that," barked Kappa. "Oh, have you all come to dissuade me from my destiny? Do you think your measly words will erase years of agony? Plots and schemes divulged from the four of you, my own brothers, who all this time never wanted me here, afraid of my abilities and power, driven by jealousy to forsake my claims and poison my children's minds. Yet you stand here, shocked by my actions, as if you've ever given me a choice." "You're right," said Kappa, who gingerly approached. "We were terrified of you, what you became, and yet without us, you'd never be what you are, an outcast not by choice but by circumstance. You never deserved that fate, he delicately said, as his hand cupped around the sword, and softly removed it from Delta's skin. Beside me, Tao was drifting to the edge of the crowd, passionately glaring at Zeta as he inched forward. Gregory and I looked on confused, while Kappa attempted to achieve the impossible.
It's too late for mercy. You ruined this city, the lot of you. I can never forgive you for what you've done, pleaded Zeta, as he looked down at his brother irately. Of course not. We don't deserve forgiveness. We abandoned you. We hurt your family and disrupted your home. Unforgivable.
Kappa was trying to ease the monster's rage, lower his guard for a reason I did not know. Zeta was beyond changing, warped in his own illusion and concrete in his nature. The doctor's work, unfortunately infallible.
Yet you stand here, helping a human, an ungrateful brat who has violated the doctor's legacy. Our purpose in this world taken away by a lying cheat, he wailed.
Kappa was failing, his anger boiling over as he backed up and raised the blade in the air. Before the hammer could be struck, Tao came lashing in from the side and heaved himself onto the giant. Kappa and Darwin joined in, lunging for their brother as they tussled on the ground. Zeta's children came rushing to his aid, eliciting a madness into the crowd who zoomed toward their militia. The two warring factions pelting against each other head-on, while I sat back in horror. Time wailed away as screams and murder littered the floor, tears and blood coating the once emerald floor red, as the moon baked the ground, bright as ever, while the war raged on, the city burning to ash in the distance. Before we had the chance to join the dearly departed in the afterlife, Gamma pulled Gregory and I by the hand. The three of us rushed to the far side of the cliff, out of danger from the tornado of slaughter occurring mere feet away from us. My eyes were drawn to the Colossus, who was slicing away at the air, while the three brothers swirled around him, a devilish dance in the center of a maniacal mosh pit. My focus was diverted by a rogue soldier who came rushing towards us, leaping in the air until Gamma tackled him to the ground. His fate was quick, as Gamma devoured the feral creature. Many of the civilians retreated back to the longhouse, the young and sick finding refuge away from the skirmish, finding solace from the family tearing themselves to pieces. It was a brutal sight to behold.
We need to leave,
screamed Gamma, as she sprouted from the floor.
There's nowhere to go,
said Gregory, as he looked down into the breakneck speeds of the waves below. Help is on the way, Gamma. We have to hold on a little longer. They'll be here soon, I assured her. Our eyes darted back to the brawl, which was cramming with dead and wounded. Zeta was clutching Tao in a snare, his arms coiled tightly around his neck, while he flung his blade back and forth, warding off the efforts of the two brothers, who tried fiercely to rescue the suffocating creature. Zeta then twisted his brother's neck and threw him to the floor, a violent tug that served as a mercy for the breathless victim. His warped path wasn't over as he suplexed Darwin to the floor. Kappa was of no help, busy wrestling Zeta's sons on the turf, distracted while the giant scratched and clawed at his brother's face. In the excitement of the wrestle, the blade had fallen to the floor. Before him was a clear path, a chance to save my friend and kill the beast while I still had the chance. A chance I took as I started sprinting forward, determined to end the monster's destruction. My efforts were swift, as I was heaved back to the earth. Both Gamma and Gregory held me down while we watched the Colossus mangle Darwin, Zeta's hands like a hurl of bricks, smacking away at his prey.
Walter, we need to jump, said Gamma, as she shook me into cognition. We'll die, pleaded Gregory. If we sit here, we'll die. If we fight, we'll die. But if we jump, we might live. Swim ashore through the waves and find refuge. The doctor's people will find us, and I'm certain, she cried. I tilted my head over the 100-foot drop and swooned in dread. Not even adrenaline could have numbed my anxiety at that point, my face firmly down the barrel of a gun. The doctor's contorted corpse lied punctured atop the rocks, which struck profusely from the sea floor. Stinging and dark, a crude reminder that if we were to jump, then we best jump far. From behind us, screams and yelps of pain could be heard, the crowd coming to a motionless blur, as they all watched in unison Goliath beating David to a pulp on the floor. Defeated as he writhed in pain, he then plucked the cutlass from the floor and raised it, gleaming at its beauty as the moon kissed the steel. Kappa rushed forward, yelping at the top of his lungs as he tried to save his brother. "You traitor!" he screeched as he sprinted after the giant. Zeta then turned towards him and lanced the blade through his heart. "Ah, that's where you're wrong, my brother. I've warned you of the cost for betrayal, how I treat traitors, and your ignorance has deceived you. And now I can finally free you from it, release you from the strings of blindness." He then faintly removed the sword and ended his brother's life. As a thump hit the floor, Gamma yelped in torment. Zeta's gaze whipped back towards her as he bowed. "Mother! How proud you must be of what your children have become," he avowed. He was filthy. A once milky pale complexion littered with streaks of charcoal and burgundy, ashes of his father's history, and the blood of his fallen brothers. "You're not my son. A son of mine would never do something like this," she replied, her venomous words failing to pierce the Titan's unflinching armor. "And yet here I am, correcting your wrongs. All of this could have been prevented if you trusted me, if you had an ounce of faith in my vision. Instead, your conviction resided in an empty hope. Sons you thought were special and pure, sons who are now dead. Well, not all are dead. You're still beating, aren't you, Delta?" said Zeta, as he stomped on his brother's chest. "You've turned into a monster," she exclaimed, while Delta coughed and curled on the ground. No. A monster is someone who turns her back on her child. One who rejects her creator's ambition and soils his memory by saving the same human who defiled it. You are a monster who never loved her son. That's what a monster is," he cried, while blood trickled down his arms. He was wounded and unhinged while his sons gazed up at him in terror. "Of course I loved you," she panted. "The doctor told me of your wicked ways, how you tried to smother me as a baby, how you let my brothers beat me and bully me. You never did a thing. You were ashamed of me because I looked different, and that's all it took. Zeta, none of that's true. The doctor poisoned your mind, she bawled. He freed my mind from all of you. He taught me what none of you could. Despite your shortcomings, Mother, I did learn something crucial from you. I've learned how not to parent, how not to lead. My boys have grown into the obedient soldiers the doctor always wanted, the crown jewel of his research. All through my guidance, they've become kings, he panted, out of breath and woozy while he stood. Don't believe me? I'll prove it, he said, as he motioned for one of his sons to come forth. Keita, kill your uncle. End his reign, he commanded, as he offered the blade to the frightened creature. He did not get a response, as the beast cowered away with his brothers. Coward! Yelled Zeta, offering the blade to another. Yuri! Here, take it, he pleaded to his son. Again, no answer. They see what you are. You no longer have any power here, said Gamma, as he inched back against the cliff, her hands tugging at the backs of Gregory and I's shirts. And just where do you think you're going? Asked Zeta, as he started marching towards us. We need to jump, she whispered to the both of us as she turned back towards the cliff. You will not abandon me again, Mother, he roared, sprinting towards us with all his might. She's right, Gregory softly affirmed as he teetered on the edge. I thought they were mad, but when a 500-pound truck is blazing right towards you, your options are fairly limited. Their lunacy had been confirmed as they leaped off the rock and dove into the water, the two of them washing away with the waves. It was a sight that took moments to register, but when the realization took hold, effectively plummeted my heart thousands of feet. I peered back at the monster, who was steps away from slaughter, and exhaled, peering down at my escape, a vortex of water that was twisting and whirling amidst the light of night. I then closed my eyes, put my hands to my chest, and jumped.